What do you make of the theory? There are some who believe that this kind of soft power that the USAID wielded can be effective if it takes out smaller dominoes on the road to Moscow and Beijing. I mean, that's kind of been a strategy of many of the foreign policy blob or a lot of the neoconservatives types. They say, well, if soft power and hard power, military power, can be exercised along Russia's border, in Latin America, in Africa, in Eurasia, and we can regime change all smaller countries, weaker countries, then we can isolate and eventually destroy both Russia and China. Whatever Donald Trump does with the organization, the fact that it caused a firestorm means that people are very suspicious of these kind of organizations and have known for quite a long time that they don't operate in the way that they say they do. Where does this leave the U.S. empire now, given that not only is our soft power institutions being questioned, but I have this question to you about how is this strategy actually working out for the U.S. empire?
Not at all. You answered your own question with some of the verbs and adjectives you used. The empire wants to destroy. The empire wants to get rid of. The empire wants to change majorly, if not totally. And that's what aid is aimed at. And we do it in the name of democracy and even occasionally still Christianity and the values of Christianity and liberal democracy at that, and the world rules-based order and all those things. Those are farcical now. And the world finally is waking, at least 6 billion people in the world are finally awakening to the fact that they're farcical. They are disguised for post-colonial colonialism. They are disguised for hegemony. They are disguised for you do it my way or go to the highway and we'll rip the highway up on you. They're a disguise for we will drop bombs on you if you don't correspond with our wishes. They're a disguise for we've been allied with the 5 to 6% of people in Latin America, for example, who are oligarchs and oriented towards the same thing we are, profit and not their people. And we will be associated with you and you alone. And we will overthrow any government that tries to give the people power. In Venezuela, in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Argentina, in Chile, anywhere in Latin America that this happens, we will destroy you. That's the empire. And that's what's going to kill us.
Donald Trump has entered office. He entered office with all kinds of promises. And I'm glad you brought up that peak power theory, because Donald Trump has come out with a bluster. He's the tariffs, the USAID, threatening Europe now, talking about ending the conflict in Ukraine. But we're already seeing a lot of these moves be set back. Mexico, Canada, no more tariffs on them after very brief conversations. And it was actually unclear in a lot of ways what exactly Donald Trump was actually trying to get here.
Danny, I think that's the reason Steve Walt wrote his article.
Right.
We are now post-Trump peak power, a week or two.
But that leads to the question then, Colonel Wilkerson, in the world of U.S. politics, people vote for their politicians, their presidents, but we know that there's an unelected power of elites who run policy and ultimately dictate what politicians do. But what can a Donald Trump do in this moment? He was supposed to come in and change things. He was supposed to end the conflict in Ukraine, become more of an isolationist. But yet, it seems like the world situation is just a lot different from when he was first president. So what do you make of this peak that Donald Trump may have already reached? And do you feel like this could be underestimating the U.S. empire, or is it truly that it's reached its limits in a lot of ways?
The latter, I think, is part of the case. But let me just give you a hypothetical here that Trump could have done. And I think he would have shocked the world as well as done something extremely positive in a diplomatic and geopolitical, geostrategic sense. He said all these things about he would end the Ukraine war in 24 hours or a day or two or whatever. We all knew that was preposterous. But was it? If he had come in and instead of contemplating his first visit to Mohammed bin Salman or his first state visit to this country being the notorious genocidal maniac Bibi Netanyahu, if he'd have come in and said, get me a plane ticket, shut up, get me a plane ticket, Air Force One, let's go. I want to go to Moscow. Get Vladimir on the phone. Tell him I'm coming. Sit down in Moscow with Putin. As you went over Kyiv, spit at Zelensky. Then get to Moscow, sit down with Putin, and in a couple of hours, you could come up with Putin himself, you and Putin, you could come up with the rough design that was leaked in that Newsweek article and took into account most of the real parameters of a negotiated settlement and a peace. Then you go back over Kyiv and you spit at Zelensky again, and you hope someone's hanged him by that time. You get back to Washington and you tell the administration you now head as the major guy. You know, that's what you say. That's what you say. You are the boss. You tell everybody, gear yourself to this. The war in Ukraine is over. I want all the money to stop. I want all the arms to stop. I don't want one scintilla of either to get to Kyiv again. Tell Lockheed Martin to kiss my ass in a windstorm. And we're ending this war. Oh, by the way, I'm going back in a week. We're going to meet again and we're going to settle the deal. Me and Vladimir, and it's going to be over. And Vladimir's not going to do anything to the rest of NATO, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, or anybody else. And we're not going to do anything to him. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to sign an executive order that Ukraine's neutrality is 1,000 years into the future. I know that sounds idiotic, but I'm going to do that anyway, just to show you how I feel about it. And the war's over. And it's over within a month, if not less. That's the kind of drama he tried to create in his first term with his opening to Kim Jong-un and to North Korea. And look at what he did, because he didn't have the staying power. He didn't have the disciples around him who had the staying power and the talent and the brains. He ruined our ally in South Korea, who he made think that finally a peace agreement after 3/4 of a century was coming to the peninsula, and that they were going to be able to think about reunification, which is what, if you look at polls, about 75% of South Korea has wanted for a long time. Under 80 to 90% of South Korea has wanted. He fouled them. Part of the problems happening in Korea right now, in Seoul, with the government and everything, all come out of this failed attempt by Donald Trump. Let's do something successful, President. Let's don't do this stupid stuff where you step out into it just to get drama and to get press. Let's follow through and let's actually complete the action. And where could he do that so solidly and so dramatically and so effectively and so positively other than Ukraine? I mean, it's there. The map is in front of him to do that. Gaza's a little bit different. It's a very much different, more sticky problem, as Netanyahu is going to show here over the next 24 hours or so. But he could do that with Ukraine and gain so much capital initially, right off the bat, gain capital, and put to rest some of these people out there who are screaming and hollering about he's taking over the republic. He's going to destroy us. Elon Musk is an idiot going around with the keys from GAO to every building in the government. I know how hard it is to get those keys. We couldn't get them when the hanging Chads were still hanging in Florida, and we couldn't even get a space in the Harry Truman building. He seems to be able to get wherever he wants to get and have the keys with him.
I'm glad you brought up the myth and reality with Trump's bravado. You know, from the beginning, Colonel Wilkerson, I was always suspicious of the cabinet he brought in. And this is what's so interesting, because you brought up the example of Korea. What I'm seeing from Donald Trump now, Colonel Wilkerson, is there's some of that madman, like, let me push the limits. He's talked poorly about Russia. He's spewed a lot of misinformation, actually, about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But I think that this overall strategy is a bit of a miscalculation at this point. Right now, Russia doesn't have to come to the table if it doesn't want to. The tariffs that he just slapped on China just slaps them right back on coal and agricultural industry. They're going to sue the United States at the WTO, whatever that will do. But then they've also done the rare earth minerals around the U.S. military and sanctioning those as a tit for tat around sanctions. And I'm just curious on whether you believe that Donald Trump's quote unquote madman diplomacy can really sustain in this age of the rise of Russia, China, BRICS, this overall new world order that we're seeing, which Donald Trump's not very happy about, and he wants to do something about it.
I don't think his way of going about it will work, at least as it's been exemplified so far. I think it's just more of the same, with lots more bombast and lots of rhetoric and a lot less thought. At least I can give credit to Blinken and Sullivan for evil thought, in my view, but at least they had thought. I don't think, first of all, you can stop this. This is going to happen. I think the best you can do, and what you should do, what wisdom, if it prevailed, would cause you to do, is to go along with it. Not in the sense that you surrender. There's no surrender or victory associated with this kind of movement. In the sense that you accommodate it and you deal with it and you prosper from it yourself. And you don't try to fight it in the sense of using your vast military strength to do so. And there's a asterisk. If you've read Dexter Filkins' article in the New Yorker, Dexter finally, Dennis Leach and I, General Leach and I, kind of put him on writing that article. And it's a very good article in terms of how weak we are, conventional forces, how weak we are, how we would depend entirely on our nuclear weapons if we went to war with a peer power entirely, because we couldn't beat them with conventional might. So if you recognize what's happened, you recognize the irrepressible inexorability of what's happening, that history is against you. History is moving as it once moved before to shift from the east to the west. It's now moving to shift from the west to the east. If you understand that and you try to accommodate it and make all the money you can from it and do all the trade and commerce you can from it, which is kind of what happened with the East as they tried to accommodate the shift from their territory into our territory, as it were, then you can make a whole lot better world out of it. You don't have to be in a zero-sum game. You don't have to be in a hegemonic game. You don't have to be in this, this is what I don't like about Mearsheimer's realism, for example. You don't have to be in this world where you have to admit to yourself that war is inevitable, that we are going to kill each other because of the power struggles in the world. I think that's nonsense. I know history vouchsafes that John is more often than not right, but it still means that there's no hope. There's no ability to get out of this trap, if you will. And right now, the trap has a part of it that is very, very dangerous: nuclear weapons. And to arrest this shift, if you maintain the posture that Donald Trump and the rest of this empire seems to want to maintain, you're going to result in using nuclear weapons, because that's the only thing you have at the end of the day to stop the shift. And you're going to stop it all right. You're going to stop it for all of human civilization, probably. And that's a daunting prospect to think about it. And yet, I've been alive long enough to know that this country sometimes makes some really bad decisions. And this would be the ultimate bad decision, in my view. There's no other country on earth that I can think about right now that possesses nuclear weapons that has the remotest thought of using them, except us.
Realism, I think, makes a lot of assumptions too, because in these interim steps before nuclear conflict, which the world is unfortunately headed toward, there are a lot of perhaps different ways of going about, for example, the United States in the South China Sea and in the Asia Pacific, or the United States in Eurasia as a whole, along Russia's border in Eastern Europe. There are different ways, perhaps, that you could go about attempting to achieve your interests without provoking and promoting war, right? It's like an inevitability of war, but the wars it's one-sided. The inevitability really falls on the side of Washington, D.C., it seems like, because China, for example, and Russia too, they didn't ask for militarization. They didn't say this was the only way that doing things relating to each other, working out differences could be done. Russia tried so hard to prevent the conflict in Ukraine with many, many, many attempts at making deals with the West. China has said they'll always talk with the West. They do business greatly with the West, but they never said that this needs to happen. So it seems like there's some one-sidedness here that often isn't acknowledged, in my opinion, with realism, that there are players who are pushing for war. Then there are also players on this chessboard, if we look at it like that, that are not, and regardless of whether they engage in it or not, which Russia had to. Your thoughts?
No, you're right. And history demonstrates that from time to time, at least, and those times are very horrendous in some occasions, the side pushing for force is the side that wins out, often on multiple planes. That is to say, if you look at World War I or World War II, it was quite a lot of people that walked into that war knowing what they were walking into, but not knowing what they were walking into. So you got to get rid of that, I think, to have a more peaceful world and to have a world that doesn't always court destruction with these nuclear weapons. And you don't do it by using the policies of the past. The policies of the past are bereft. They're broken. They didn't work. They led us periodically into war. War that could be settled, some would say. Some wars must end. Some wars must be fought, as Edward Wacko argue. Why? You ask the question. Why? Because there are people in the world who think the way you do, and there are people in the world who act the way you do. Democracies, I remember this argument I had with Colin Powell at one time. Someone had said, and Powell picked it up and was making it a part of his speeches as Secretary of State, democracies don't go to war. And one day I looked at him and I said, what proof do you have of that? He said, well, I know, he thought I was going to use this argument. I know democracies are rather young in the scope of things in the world, 5,000 years of human history, whatever. But they don't seem to want to go to war. We could go all the way back to Athens. I said, whoa, Athens had plenty of wars. Democracies do go to war. Well, they don't do it in the modern age as much as totalitarian states. Au contraire. Democracies want to foment democracy. What is the purpose of America these days but to foment democracy? The real purpose is to make money, but he didn't have any real counter for that. Didn't have any argument to throw back at me. So as usual, he quit the argument and told me to get out of his office. My point being, let's break the mold. And let's break the mold because there won't be any mold in the future if we don't break the mold, because we have now invented the means to destroy ourselves. And so that is a mighty impetus, in my view, to doing things on a different level, to doing things better, and to doing wiser things. That doesn't mean you aren't going to have a brush conflict every now and then, or something on the periphery. You can hardly prevent it with things like Israel existing and the tension that brings. But again, I go back to my theory, and I don't think it's theory. I think it's reality. Israel is our attack dog in the Levant. That's what they are. You could throw AIPAC out tomorrow morning and we'd still be using Israel as our attack dog in the Levant, because we want to keep a reasonable hegemony in the Middle East, but we don't want to have boots on the ground necessarily to do it. So we have Israel to do it for us. And that's, I find that unconscionable this late in man's life on this planet, this early in the 21st century, if you will, a century in which we may be, I think we're aptly named the Anthropocene age, meaning very basically that things are being affected by mankind. You don't put a negative or a positive on that, but I would put a negative on that. Things are negatively being impacted by mankind. Mankind has become the dangerous animal on this planet, the most dangerous animal on this planet. And some would argue that he's destroying it. Well, let's just speed that up. Let's go to nuclear war. Well, if you use the same template that we've been using for the last 5,000 years, you're going to do that. A scientist said a few years ago on the front page of the New York Times in an article that the New York Times printed, I couldn't believe it, that we're the first civilization in human history to have the technological ability to eliminate ourselves, but the technological ability to prevent that. Do we have the wisdom to do that?
But these big promises, well, that's the question here, Colonel Wilkerson, because many have hinged their hopes on Donald Trump navigating this world to prevent that exact scenario. And he campaigned on the notion that he was going to, and he even said recently that he is interested in denuclearization and, of course, ending the conflict in Ukraine. They're not so easy once in the halls of power. Do you feel like it's very early in his administration, but do you feel like when it comes to the condition of the empire in conjunction with this very changing world order, that Donald Trump can play any positive role at all in the coming next 3+ years? Or are we going to see a repeat of his first term where the bravado and the bluster and the attempt to look different ended up turning into its exact opposite, and we saw very little difference?
True. And that which we saw that had the potential to be hugely new was adumbrated or stymied in its bid before it was even born, like North Korea. And I fear for that again, even though he seems to have come to this administration with a lot more organization and a lot more knowledge, which one would expect, of where the warts and nuts and bolts were, frayed or broken or whatever, and executive orders par excellence to fix that or to do something about it. And yet I'm watching this unfold, and I'm watching what is very trivial take place. For example, what does doing away with the Department of Education, even though I might be in favor of it, but I would certainly do it in a different way. Those people have jobs and families and such, so you can't just walk through the door and say, go home, you're out of a job, you're out of work. You got to do it in a more human way than that if you're going to do it. But what does that have to do with the kind of problems, the kind of challenges you and I are discussing right now? Absolutely nothing. So it's fighting over a tempest in a teapot while the stove the teapot is on is exploding. It's you're just not going to accomplish anything worth note by focusing on these issues that don't matter a tinker's damn, even though they might be politically sellable and politically positive for your cult. You're not going to accomplish anything in the bigger scheme of things, and in the scheme of things that says, I arrest this shift of power, or maybe you don't arrest it. I don't think that's possible, but I accommodate it and I go along with it so that we can maximize our advantage from it as it happens. And we're talking about a lot of years here that this is going to take to happen. The last one took about 1,000 years. This one will be faster, but I don't think it'll be that much faster. So accommodating it and not using nuclear weapons in that time and preventing the climate from pretty much taking us out anyway are going to be major challenges in this experience, which require, in order to be met, they cannot be met otherwise, cooperation, collaboration, and comity. There's no way you're going to meet the challenges of the climate with just one country or two or NATO doing what needs to be done while the rest of the world doesn't, or vice versa. It looks more like the rest of the world might be doing more than we are. You can't solve the problems that way. Everybody has to work together. If there were a providence, a divine providence, if there were some guiding hand in the universe, I would think that he or she would be looking down right now saying, okay, you got one chance and then it's toast. You're done, because I'm not going to give you another chance. You don't deserve it.